By herb standards, not many like the winter, but in this video we're going to tell you about the most cold tolerant herbs. I'm John Valentino with Chip Valentino. I'm a landscape architect and a landscape contractor, and Chip and I are in our front yard with three herbs that we grow: oregano, rosemary, mint. They do well in our zone 9. They take heat very well, which we have a lot of in zone 9. And we don't have a lot of real cold temperatures, but these three would actually tolerate temperatures down to about 10 degrees. And that's excellent for herbs and a little unusual for herbs. And I'll clue you in on how to maybe even allow them to tolerate slightly colder temperatures than that. So by herb standards, these three are remarkably hardy. That word hardy means tolerant to cold in a horticultural sense. The three are mint, oregano, and rosemary, and they'll actually tolerate temperatures down to about 10 degrees. Now, they don't necessarily grow or thrive, but they will come back in the spring, which is unusual for herbs, and these are three of the hardiest. A tip that I've been using to allow them to tolerate cold weather as well as possible is infusing the soil with all kinds of organic compounds and life. Actually acts as an antifreeze to where you get the benefit of another 2 to 4 degrees. Very important with citrus too. That's a trick you can use, is by focusing on your soil, you'll get increased cold tolerance. So in this case, we infuse our soil in our herb gardens with beneficial life. We do that with our own products. Good quality compost would also do it, or a lot of compost tea. We use blend at least once a year. Depending on the performance of the plants, we might even apply it twice per year as per the label recommends, or even more than that. Really, the more the better, but at a minimum, once per year. Oregano is an herb that I use a lot of in our own cooking, and in this garden we can show you two types of oregano. They're actually both supposed to be Italian oregano, and just through tasting I prefer one over the other because it produces a product that I like the flavor of it better. But there's an interesting procedure that I'll describe to you briefly when you harvest and process oregano. In almost every herb, and oregano is a classic example, the best time for maximum flavor and aroma to harvest them is right early in the blooming process. And so that's how you know when to harvest oregano for the best final product. I wait till it just starts to bloom, and then when it's just beginning to bloom is when the leaves are at their best in terms of aroma for a dried oregano. And so we cut them something like this, and you can see these are old blooms, but just because of the season we're in now, but they look kind of like this when they just start to bloom. And we cut them, and then we dry them. I dry them by just leaving them outside in the shade. If you leave them in the sun, they discolor. So if you want that final product to have some nice green to it, then you dry them in the shade. And so this usually happens in late spring, so there's a lot of warm weather. And then we strip all the leaves and the flowers, and that's a difference in a lot of the description that I saw online regarding processing oregano. Is we think it's important to use the flower, and so we strip the flower and the leaf, and that combination makes really fantastic finished product. And then we use just a colander to make the final product into a jar that looks like this. Once I harvest all the oregano that I want and I process it, then I cut it back and I cut it almost to the ground, maybe 6 to 12 inches above ground. And in my case, because of where we are, that's the only time that I prune it. So oregano is one of the few herbs that I think chefs would agree is actually better dried. Many call for fresh mint or fresh rosemary. In the case of oregano, I think the dried one is actually superior, but you can use oregano fresh also. You can even use it in the middle of the winter, which we're talking about here. All of these herbs that we're looking at can be used in the middle of the winter fresh, as long as you haven't had real cold weather yet. If we were to get some temperatures below 30 degrees, then the mint might not be usable, but you could just tell by looking. And the oregano would have fewer leaves. Right now, the oregano is full of leaves, very usable fresh. Mint has the reputation of being invasive, probably a well-deserved reputation. You'll notice in these plantings, I haven't really had a lot of problems with it being invasive. In some cases, it's surrounded by paving or other types of paths, and they're by themselves. Or in one spot, we allow it just to grow into the oregano, and invasiveness hasn't been an issue. It does its best and is its healthiest in temperatures 50 to 75 degrees. So you'll notice it growing like crazy in the spring and the fall. Like in an area like ours where we have very hot weather, it's less healthy and less nice looking in the summer. And in the winter, in fact, in the winter, it can go deciduous if you have below freezing temperatures. And if you have way below freezing temperatures and you want to best prepare it for handling those, in addition to infusing the soil with life, another technique that's used on mint frequently is right after the first frost, you could cut it back severely, almost down to the soil, and then use at least 2 inches or so of some type of mulch, and that will protect the roots in the plant. And then when weather warms again, it'll resprout. So it's a perennial in that sense, even though it can go deciduous in the coldest weathers. In our area here in the middle of California, we don't have that issue. It pretty much stays green even through the winter because our low temperatures are just a little bit below freezing, and it really doesn't seem to impact mint. Rosemary is an interesting one with lots of nuances to the topic of rosemary. Culinary rosemary is actually a more upright one, one like a variety like Tuscan Blue or Chef's Choice. The one I have here in my front garden is a low-growing one, more like a tall ground cover. Varieties like Prostratus and Lockwood DeForest, those are low-growing. If you prune them right, you could keep them even at 12 inches. This one here is probably up to about 2 feet, but grows horizontally, and a very tough, water-efficient plant that actually is somewhat sensitive to too much water. And when it gets really hot, if you have heavy soil, it can be a balancing act to keep your rosemary looking its best. So in the winter in our area, rosemary pretty much looks like it does the rest of the year, except it usually doesn't bloom unless you had a warm spike during the winter, but usually it doesn't bloom. And but it stays evergreen and doesn't look much different. If you have temperatures down to, say, 10 degrees, then you start to see the effects of winter, which we don't have here. So we never see it stress from a winter standpoint. I'd say down to 24, 25 degrees, it looks just normal, like this one looks right now. But it is a perennial. It's an evergreen perennial. You shouldn't have any problem with rosemary at all unless you live in a very cold winter area that has temperatures 15, 10 degrees and below. And again, in those areas, a key to keeping it looking its best right through the winter is infusing that soil with life. either with good quality compost or compost tea or earthworm castings, or our blend, which I use on rosemary very effectively. All the products that I've mentioned here, the links are in the description below. Last week, Oscar and I talked about citrus in containers, and you can check out that video right here. We asked you what your favorite citrus is, and the winner of a free bag of blend is this week, the successful winner, we will give you a free bag of blend, which is really important in allowing your herbs to tolerate cold weather at their best. So this week, we'd like you to tell us what your favorite dish is to cook with either fresh or dried herbs, and let us know in the comments below. My favorite dish to cook with herbs of all kinds, fresh and dried, is pizza. If you'd like to see my pizza recipe, check out our short 1-minute video.